Man, oh man, we are having a day. I'll tell you that.
Whew.
It's
Where is the summer slowdown I was promised?
yeah. Not to mention the fact that we have a multi-regional just cluster of a day going on here today. We got Precious putting out fires in Texas. I've heard it's like 9 billion degrees in Texas as well. Is that correct?
Well, the interesting thing is, I've spared no, details when it comes to how my family is impacted by the freeze
Mm-hmm.
and the electric grid. So there's tons of memes are floating around right now. Like apparently we shut down when it's cold, we shut down when it's hot. They sent out a message, and I think they asked everyone on the grid to bump up our AC to like 78 degrees. Like, is it even on?
Yeah.
So it's just we're just having a time. But hey, it's a great time to be alive. I can't complain. So
I look. There's definitely people that have it worse off. So I guess we
first
could
world
always
problem.
kind
I
of
get it.
take stock of that.
Yes.
I think I was just telling you, Precious, before we hit the live button that I got the wrong name of the person that we're having on for How to CPCU at 5:30. So I had to back out all of the creative, the thumbnails I had to change, and I had to update all of the posts and things like that. So that was a happy like 10 minutes of just sheer panic, which was fun before hitting the button. So that being said, after that mess is over and done with, this is How Like a CPCU. I'm Matt. This is Precious. We are put
Hey.
on by volunteers from the Agents and Brokers Interest Group, which is part of the CPCU Society. And so we are happy to give you tips, tricks, hacks, best practices, ways to sell, and do it at a high level. And really, this is open to anyone, but these are our beats from folks from the CPCU Society that,
Yes.
we don't just do things at like the bare minimum level. I think the level of insurance sales nerdery that is within the CPC Society and probably included between you and I here are at a very high level. So today we are talking about something that I think a lot of brokers take a very wide range of approaches to, and for various reasons. And so we're talking about claims. We're talking about the moment that insurance actually becomes realized, right?
Hmm.
Like, I mean, insurance is nothing but a hollow promise
Yes.
and a one sided transaction for the most part, at least kind of tangibly, until a claim actually happens. And so, as a broker or a risk manager, how far do you put your thumb in that pie? Like, where do you kind of fit into that? So, um, just let's start with, where do you think philosophically, Precious, kind of like the broker is supposed to fit into that whole, separate operation system of operations to, file, administer, and close out that claim?
So I think when it comes to, claims, and again, we are in essence, the manufacturer's representative, right?
Mm,
We're the ones that set them up with the policy. We're the ones that explain to them how it would respond in various situations. And so an insurance policy doesn't come with an owner's manual per se,
mhm.
right? It tells you what it can do. It doesn't really talk about what it should do.
Yeah.
And there's exclusions that tell you what it won't do. But I think that, again, and this is partially the underwriter hat that I wear sometimes, and then the producer hat as well.
Hmm.
I cringe when I see loss runs that have a lot of what I refer to as nuisance claims.
Mm,
They're very low dollar amounts, or again, the classic open and paid out at zero because it was less than deductible or something like that.
yeah.
And so I remember from a former life, right, when I was in personal lines, and we used to get the call that says, I think there may be damage on my roof. Can you send someone
Yeah.
to look at it? And you have to explain to them, for us to send someone, that is called filing a claim. And
Hmm.
that someone is going to be a claim adjuster.
Yeah.
So, regardless of their findings, whether there's major damage, minor damage, no damage, to send someone out, step one is opening the claim, step two is them going out. So, here's the alternative. Why don't you call a roofer? Someone who's going to come out and they're going to give you a free estimate or whatever because they want the business, right? And at least they can confirm the presence of damage. And
Yep.
especially being down here in the South, in the, Dallas is a little bit further south than Tornado Alley, but we're
Yep.
right smack dab in the middle of what's fastly becoming hail hell.
Yeah. The frozen part of hell. Yes.
Yes. And so hail damage is a huge reason why DFW now is kind of, being scrutinized in terms of, loss ratios. I'm hearing more and more as the commercial market hardens that roof exposures, right? It's one thing
Yep.
to say that you've got like an apartment complex with 200 units. Are those units in a high rise or are those units garden style? It matters when you talk about the amount of exposure as far as roofs are concerned.
Yeah.
So I say all that to say how that ties back to this conversation is when customers understand that both frequency and severity are going to be monitored, and that a lot of this, no, we're not in control of when catastrophic things happen. Bad things happen. That's why we buy the policy.
Mm-hmm.
But how much of this do you need to be preparing for? How much of this can you potentially retain when it comes to first party losses?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if you hit someone that's not your call on whether or not you turn it in, third party is completely different. So there is a little bit of influence that we need to leverage to just properly educate people on how they're going to present as paper. We never
Mm-hmm.
want to assume to get in the way of and prevent losses from being reported, right? We're not
Yep.
trying to sweep things under the carpet, but we also have to make people aware that should you choose to pull this ripcord, this is what's going to happen.
Yep.
And in the long run, do you really want to see a rate increase over something that was probably pocket change to just go ahead and repair out of pocket?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good point. So Mike K is, I believe,
In the
watching live. So
house.
I would love to hear his opinion on this because he works in the property underwriting world.
Mm-hmm.
But so to kind of piggyback on your point, yeah, the broker's job is really to tell the story of the account, right? Like especially when you're during marketing and trying to place coverage and things like that. And so part of that job that happens after the coverage is placed is helping to craft what the future story looks like, or at least trying to guide it, right? And so that's a big point that like a lot of people, because this transaction seems like it's one-sided, like year in year out you're paying premium and you're like, well, I should get something for it,
Mm.
right? But the $200 that you get this year over your deductible, whatever that is that really worth the potential ding on your underwriting going forward?
Mm-hmm.
That could cost you a couple grand, maybe. Like who knows, depending on how it's debited and credited on the back end, right? And so yeah, third party's a different animal. I mean, when it's a matter of liability or something like that, you want that on the record because if it balloons, that is a gigantic gaping liability for the broker to have kind of like said, whatever, sit on it for a while and
And
let's see
we
how it goes, right?
understand that, a failure to report timely,
Yeah,
is an issue. And
yeah,
so, especially with liability things, because there's so many things that the carrier reserves the right to jump in to mitigate, they have to get on top of a situation when it's happening as soon as they can. If you tell them about something after the fact, after it's turned into a mess, then you also face the possibility of it being declined or denied all outright because you didn't tell them about it.
oh yeah.
So yeah, we're not advocating at all for teaching people how to hide their mess. Yep. So I
Mike
love that we're
Mike K's
telling
got a
them
great point.
how
Yeah,
to protect your insurability, because a rate increase is one thing, a non-renewal is another.
mm,
You start turning in just all these, if the frequency is there and the question is going to come up, what are you doing to prevent similar recurring? Because it looks like there's an exposure. You've left the gate open, right?
yeah,
And so if the dog gets out because the gate's left open, who closed the gate to make sure
yeah,
another one doesn't get out? Or is it just going to be every other month more of the same?
right.
So the educational part, the preventative measures, especially for those of us who are in risk management as well, showing people and explaining to people that the insurance coverage is supposed to be your last resort. That's the fail safe. And I
Yeah.
think, Matt, you have your analogy on, the tightrope, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So teaching them, some proactive measures, in order to avoid EPLI stuff. These are some of the things you want to have in place early on, to kind of reduce the ability to, the likelihood rather of having
Yep.
to use it.
Yes.
So this is all kind of pre-loss counseling that we do. The
Yep.
moment the basement is flooding is probably not the moment.
No, I mean what's the analogy I'm looking for? It's like, the ship has the train has left the station, right? Like you can't roll back time. Like once that happens, I mean, that's the funny stories or the unfunny stories of brokers that are like, clients that called up and like, hey, remember that policy that you quoted for me 3 months ago, but I didn't take? Can you bind that because I have a claim that needs to be put in? It's like, no, I'm sorry. Like that is, that's the past. Like we have to figure out what
Or
reality looks like going
And
forward.
we've all gotten that email where someone is all of a sudden fascinated with like exclusion number 24 on
Hmm.
page number 58, and they want to call you and debate the finer points of this exclusion. So that's
Yep.
one of the things I learned early on. The very first question that I have before I get into hypotheticals is, are we speculating on an actual loss?
Yeah. Yes.
Because
Yeah.
if we are, this is not where this conversation happens. We
I'm
pass it
just
along.
asking for a friend, and that friend is me, right?
That's the thing now. I was going to go on Jeopardy, and I thought that, exclusions would be a category, and just for my own betterment, I just want. That never happens. No one wakes up and says, let me flip to page 62
Non-insurance folks know. I
and
mean, like
relitigate this
underwriter.
piece that
I
it's just not
Mike
fair.
Mike K probably wakes up every so often. He's like, about that CG 2010. I was always wondering about, like, that kind of thing is like, insurance nerds think about that, not like,
Yes.
normal people that have other jobs. Like that's not a thing.
No.
So no,
So
that's
normally
completely
those
true.
are dead ringers for, hey, talk to me about retroactively binding. Hey, tell me how this exclusion actually plays out. Can you tell me what's meant by this word? Those are, again, for your E&O's sake, the very first question you need to ask is this still just in the world of hypothetical, or is the basement flooding?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. And so we have a couple of good points here. Matt Maxwell also in. This is Matt's bread and butter. I wish
Yes.
I had thought to send out a invite. I mean, Matt, it sounds like said he's busy, so he might not be able to pop on. But throw it in the comments if you can pop on, Matt, and I will email you the link. But he's saying, or having known or existing losses that aren't disclosed during the renewal process, and if all of a sudden you get this like Monday morning workers' comp claim esque thing
Mm-hmm.
on the property side, where it's like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that like a week ago there was some water damage. All of that stuff. Yes, it has to do with the long term viability and the long term insurability of the risk, right? Like the business or the organization. And so that really helps on the front end. And then Mike K actually brought up something really good here is the idea of a loss retention plan. So if you are a company that experiences frequent small sized claims, then just build a larger deductible or retention plan into your overall insurance structure, because it just makes more sense not to be trading dollars with your insurance carrier, regardless of whether it's first party or third party claims.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, like that's the front end, right? Like that's the hypotheticals, it's the frequency, it's things like that. So we have a valid claim. Like let's kind of like get further down the tracks here. We have a valid claim. Um, do you handle the actual input of the claim, or the actual I'll say the wording of how the claim is submitted to the carrier, or are you letting the insured's words speak for themselves in terms of the reporting?
So first notice of loss is always interesting. I know that there are certain carriers, like in recent years, and they've changed the dynamic of how that flows, right?
Mm.
So I'm from the old school where they call the agent's office. We took first notice of loss entered it into a system, told them, hey, be on the lookout in the next 24-48 that you're going to get, a call back. Is this still the best number? That kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
I think in cases of catastrophe, most of the major carriers usually have, their call centers that they stand up so that, because they know that there's going to be a huge influx of calls from an affected zip code. I've seen some really slick, AI type things now that if it identifies that you're in an area or zip code where something has happened, is proactively prompting you,
Yeah.
hey, there's a good chance that you probably also, have something that you need to report, so there's all sorts of ways to do so. It's kind of a mixed bag, right? Because oftentimes the insured calls, maybe you go over, or you confirm, or deny that. For example, is that auto rated? Is that is that peril covered? And so sometimes you can have a pre-conversation that dictates, does it even get turned in?
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so when you explain to them, that yes, it's covered, let's go ahead and either I'm going to take the information, because for some E&S markets, you have to do the first notice of loss like on an accord. They can't call the wholesaler or the market to do, the reporting. And so you are in the middle of that. But then there's also opportunities, I know, again, with some of the larger personal lines carriers where they have like express claim handling, where it's very possible they can do a one call settlement, right? You call in, you got a tow bill, you got a rear view mirror or something that got knocked off. They can kind of scope it by phone. By the time you hang up, you've got an ACH coming your way. So I don't ever want to delay a process.
Yeah.
So sometimes in those instances, there's an ability either to transfer, to conference, just to make sure it got to where it needed to go and that the ball is rolling.
Yeah.
But I think that's really kind of the meat of what we're going to talk about. Now that it's set in motion, how involved are you? I've received first notice of loss that included photos, right?
Yeah.
Just right out the gate. Anything that they gave me, I'm passing it along.
Yeah.
I don't want to sit on anything, right? And then I also, copy the insured on it so that they know who I've handed it off to. And I always tie it in a nice little bow. Like, hey, proactively sending this over. However, since our conversation, I've confirmed this email, this phone number, this claim number, this fax number, whatever, so that, again, it's kind of like matchmaker, right? Now that I paired you up, move on. There's no need to loop me in on every back and forth. But if you need someone to get involved, I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm a big proponent of that as well. So like my overarching kind of like philosophy is, all right, I'm here to help you get to the point where it's reported. And then the only time I really want to have to step in after that is if all of a sudden there's like red flags or things just kind of blow up in the claims handling process. If everything's kind of, smooth sailing, like don't include me because I'm just going to be an extra step in the process. Getting back to that actual like first report, something else that I tell the clients is be as succinct as you can be, but still answer the 5 questions, right? The who, what, where, when, why, right? But so be as succinct as you can. And sometimes we get into this, sometimes we don't, but that question between wear and tear versus like sudden and fortuitous loss, right? I'm always like, I'm not a claims adjuster. You're not a claims adjuster. Let's not even prognosticate or try and prognosticate what caused this loss. Just say what happened, right?
Yes.
Like roof started leaking or whatever. Like here, this is the damage. This is the date and time that we discovered it or we think it happened on. Like go, right? Like that from that standpoint, that's where I'm kind of getting involved in the actual verbiage of how the claim is being submitted. And like you said, if it's a market that requires an actual specific form for that claim, I'll work as that messenger boy or whatever messenger person to get that done. So yeah, once it gets rolling, like, and it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter what type of claim it is, with maybe the exception of like an ongoing cyber issue. Like, if it's a cyber issue and there's really like we got to get back up to speed like as quickly as possible, I might actually want to be involved in that process over at least like the first week until they're back up and running. Then once we get to like the forensic like investigation part of it, I let the computer nerds take care of that. Like, I'm an insurance nerd, they're computer nerds for a reason, right? Like,
Absolutely.
y'all do that, right? And so that's a little bit different, but for pretty much every other type of claim, whether it's EPL, if it's, oh my God, the EPL claims, it's always like, if you get involved in it as the broker, like in the middle, I can tell you on the public sector side, the EPL claims are sometimes the worst because it's always like hurt feelings. Like, and so now you have like a couple of people involved and you have a professional relationship with both of them. And like, they're both kind of like talking trash about each other. And you're
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't want to be involved in this. Like, this is not my job. Like, I'm a therapist, but when it comes to like insurance stuff, not when it comes to relationship stuff. Okay. So that is like kind of difficult to get in the middle of. So most of those claims, I'm like, look, as long as the train is headed down the tracks in the right direction, I don't want to necessarily kind of like upset it and like, validate, quote unquote, validate my existence by like being, all hands on with the claim itself.
So Mike made another good comment, if you can bring it to the
Yep.
screen since you have the magic button over there. Um, being careful about confirming coverage. And this is really complicated sometimes because it's the equivalent of, as the insured, that we remind our clients not to voluntarily assume liability, right?
Right.
If there's an accident, when you're talking to someone who's just had a loss, you want to show empathy.
Yep.
Obviously, that goes without saying, right? Oh my gosh, is everyone okay? Man, that's rough. I hate this happened to you. And so express empathy, give them the reassurances that we have started the process, like they will reach out to you, they're going to get this info from you. Never weigh in. Never weigh in
Mm-hmm.
on what the outcome's going to be. Oh yeah, we should be able to get this paid for you right away. Oh yeah, we'll get, we're going to,
Yeah.
because now, again, as the appointed agent, we're an extension of the carriers we represent,
Yeah.
right? That's what the appointment says. So there's some binding authority and there's some legality that goes into there. If you told them, oh yeah, slam dunk, we're going to pay for it all, you get them over. There's a reason that claim has to be, denied, which is outside of your scope, right? You don't know, you don't all the ins and outs that go into it. Now they come back and say, no, you don't understand. I already put it on my credit card because Matt said you guys are going to reimburse me.
Oh, I've had a couple of those. That's like, I don't know if we can unring this bell here. Like,
Yeah.
that's always a good one.
Because, when you, again, and it's so hard because that's right on the cusp of, again, being empathetic,
Yeah.
oh, I'm so glad we've got this coverage for you. I'm so glad we were able to, place this policy for you. This policy covers, and again, I get into the habit of, just reading the verbiage on there, okay, looking at this deck page, that's the covered location. We're going to go ahead and get this turned in. They're going to collect some more data from you. And I always put that out there too, because sometimes, even as consumers, we get frustrated if something appears to be redundant. Well, I
Right.
already told him what that was. Well, the him that you told wasn't the decision maker.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm getting some upfront info. They're going to verify this info. They're going to ask for more info. There's going to be a process. It is really important, especially, like I said, in catastrophe situations, the number on file is probably a home phone. Well, guess what? That home is a pile of sticks. That's probably not going to be the best phone number to reach them at anymore.
Yeah.
So making sure that you're collecting that info. Yeah, we get passionate about this stuff. Look, Mister, I'm busy. Come on, click the link, Matt.
Come on over,
Get on the
Matt. Let's go.
call. It can be Matt and Matt today. But yeah, we just always want to just common sense stuff, right?
Yeah.
Are you safe? Are things stable? That question comes up oftentimes. Yes, if something is reasonable to, can I buy a tarp? Get the tarp, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Get the plywood. Like if it's within reason, of course, this is an issue that is near and dear to me because I have spent some time in claims, right? And so when you talk to someone and they've already disposed of stuff, and it's just so cringy, you're like, you threw it out before anyone got a chance to. Well,
Did
the
you take a
agent
picture?
said that.
Did you take a picture at least, like so we know
Any
what state it was
attempt,
in?
right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because there's subrogation sometimes that's jeopardized if you're messing with the custody of how this stuff went. So you have the broken piece. Oh, I already called a plumber. They already hauled that out. They already replaced it with a new one. Where's the old stuff? Oh,
Yeah.
I think they already tossed it. You're like, don't get all the way into fixing yet. Mitigation versus repair.
Yes.
let's talk about make the situation stable, try to preserve as much as possible. If you can take pictures, without kind of, I'm not saying that you got to put yourself in harm's way. If the roof is collapsing, don't get in there at your Polaroid. Not the
Hmm.
time, right?
Yeah.
Get out of there, get stable, So setting expectations for sure.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, as the agent, you're going to get copied when losses are reported, especially if they're reported directly and you weren't involved in the process.
Yep.
And so, from an empathy, just out of just being a caring professional, I do reach out. Hey, man, I saw that. Is everyone good? Is everyone okay? You know, do you have what you need right
Yep.
now? Do you know who to call if something comes up? Did they tell you? I've been in situations again earlier in career where we had something devastating, like a house fire, right? And so the insured would come by the office so that we can go ahead and make copies for them
Hmm.
or fax it along for them.
Yep.
So there's that claims concierge,
Yep.
opportunity where you're just assisting. You're not getting in the middle of, because one of the things that's super cringeworthy is as an adjuster when you're on the phone with the agent arguing with the agent on why they felt coverage should be in place.
Well, that goes right to the heart of something that you kicked this off with, in terms of that agency relationship, right? Like, and the you know, can you write a check on the part of someone else, like, whether it's the insurance company or the insured or anyone else, right? Um, and the answer is, like, unless you know you have explicit authority to,
Hmm.
do not, like, pick a side. Like, yes, you're there to advocate for your insured, okay, but don't use, like, phrases like, well, yeah, this should be covered, like, yeah, we'll get it like, we'll get it covered. Like, no,
Mm.
no, we're not going to get anything covered. It either is or it isn't. And what we're going to do is we're going to report it so that the people that will have to cut the check are
Hmm.
going to essentially make that determination. And so I think that also, you bring up another good point, is this is a very good time to do that. Like, it seems like you don't want to be like a rat during this period of time. Like, this is not the period of time to, like, try and, like, cross sell someone or upsell them, right? Like,
Hmm.
don't kick them when they're down. You could prime the pump for that conversation. But while this is happening, this is a good time for one of those non-salesy touch points, right? Like, you're helping facilitate the process. You're giving them good information on what the process is going to look like. You're spot on when it's like, look, if something is like a health hazard or something like that, definitely get rid of it, okay? But if it's something of value that we're putting into this claim, please take pictures so that at least we have documentation. This also goes right to the heart of, did you advise your client to take pictures and video beforehand and have good inventory and things like that, good record keeping? I would say if you're a commercial entity, right, and this is bigger than just a small loss, have a restoration contractor
Hmm.
come in that is worth their penny, because just an average contractor or an average tradesperson that's going to come in, they're not necessarily going to understand the insurance claims process. And
Yes.
so when you say, like, throwing stuff out, that is a big distinction between a restoration contractor and someone who's just a baseline contractor. The baseline contractor is just going to come in, rip everything out as quickly as possible in order to get the job done. A restoration contractor is going to look at things. If it's the guts of the building, if it's the HVAC system, if it's stuff like that, that has to be removed because it's, infiltrated with water or mold or it's been burned up or something like that. They will take pictures as they go to make sure that they're documenting what they're getting rid of. I think something else that doesn't occur to the layperson is this idea of salvage value,
Hmm.
right? So, like, this is something that, I mean, sometimes a little bit more specialized than others. I think they get it when it comes to vehicles, right? But that being said, the concept that something still has some amount of value, and the insurance company is going to pay for, and I think maybe this is less prevalent now because we live in such a replaceable
Hmm. Hmm.
society, right? But the fact that the insurance company might want that, waterlogged or fire damaged piece of crap that you're about to throw out, they might be like, whoa, hold on, like, we might be able to, like, salvage whatever, the metal in it, or parts or something like that, right? And so that
And the
just doesn't come
fact
to
that
people's mind.
whatever they recover comes off the bottom line as far as the severity of your loss, right?
Yes.
And so there are times, like for example, with theft, right? Certain things that are stolen, I just don't want them back. I don't know where they've been, you know?
Yeah.
And, like you said, electronics these days. Oh,
Matt
see,
Maxwell is trying to turn us into I don't know what this would be, a publicity campaign. I don't know.
PSA, beware, get out of there with your collapsed roof of your Polaroid. Hey, I can do this all day, man. This is fun for me.
I can imagine all the Zennials and whatnot being like
Like
Polaroid. What
Polaroid,
the
what
hell
is
is
she?
that? My digital
Oh
camera?
man, I'm telling you. But oh gosh, the process of, again, when do you hold out for salvage versus, when do you want to retain it versus, if it's just not worth it, right? I
Yep.
marvel when I drive around and I still see TV and VCR repair shops.
Yeah, right?
What are they fronting? What is happening in there?
Yeah. Well, you know what's crazy is, so I just like a quick kind of like sidebar here. I just had to have a piece replaced on the stove.
Yes.
And the stove, literally or I had to have two pieces. One was like optional. It was like the warming burner or something like that. We never use it, right? But the other one was an actual part of the stove that if it wasn't replaced, it's now a safety hazard because gas
Mm-hmm.
gets out and stuff like that, right? And so all in, it cost like $350. And you start doing that math where you're like, okay, 350 to replace this small part versus how old is it and what would a brand new one cost? Um, and you're right. Like, what's crazy is in the world that we live in is so many of these things. It's like one small piece goes, and you're like, the hell with it. Just get rid of that and bring me a brand new one.
Because it's planned obsolescence is really what it
Yeah,
is. The Maytag man, coming out and servicing machine, that's out the window.
yeah,
A lot of times, I even think on a very simple level, like sometimes your printer and the ink.
mm,
Like, if you have like a really inexpensive, like a laser jet printer that you bought at Black Friday for like $60, but now
yeah,
it's time to get the ink and the ink's like 200 and you're like, I could literally just buy another printer.
yeah. Well, I mean, think about
That comes with the starter set of ink and it's
in a
cheaper.
business sense, so many commercial operations, the companies that are providing like equipment and tools and stuff like that. So the common idea is like a copier, right? So like
Hmm.
when you lease a copier or like you're basically buying by the total number of prints or whatever,
Hmm.
right? Um, and all that has to do with is the ink. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual machine itself.
Yes.
I ran into this when I worked in the biotech world. In the biotech world, there are tons of pieces of equipment worth millions of dollars, and a rep shows up and just drops the equipment off, and it doesn't cost you anything.
Hmm.
What costs you is the reagents and the vials and the reusable stuff that goes into the actual equipment. But so, yeah, so that tangent is basically, we don't necessarily live in a society anymore that values this idea of salvage value anymore. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I mean, there's still a significant amount of situations where, something could still be of value to the insurance company. And like you said, it can go to, decreasing the total cost of that overall claim. And, like we started off talking about the future insurability and picture of that risk or that insured. Um,
Now, a couple years ago, I worked with a company, a restoration company,
mhm,
and they had a piece of equipment, especially when it came to restoring contents, like soft
mm,
goods. Okay. And so, this whole notion that electronics aren't supposed to get wet, deionized water is fine for like cleaning like components, right?
mhm,
And so, they had like this big machine. And I think the backstory is that this machine was something that was actually created to sterilize and to cleanse sporting equipment. So you
mm,
think helmets, pads, balls, porous stuff, right? And so in essence, it was like this ginormous washing machine that but had like these compartments. So it
mhm.
wasn't just being torn up by the agitator.
Yeah.
But they had all sort of stuff and they I think it was a CE class, and what they did, which I thought was just really fascinating, is they had like a strip that you can check to basically figure out if something is like medical grade in terms of being sterile, right?
Okay.
And so they'd always ask like for a volunteer in the room, like someone give us the cell phone, right? Ladies, our cell phones are pressed against our face where our mask, our makeup is, and so cell phones are filthy, right? They're
Hmm.
always filthy. And so long story short is they would bring in like a pair of boots, right, that was like covered in soot from a house fire. One
Yeah.
of them is after it was ran through this machine, and the stuff would come out of this machine like hospital grade sterile, and it
Wow.
was phenomenal. So they could restore the teddy bears, grandma's Afghan. There's certain things that have sentimental value where, no, throwing it out and getting another blanket from like Burlington Coat Factory, it's not the same.
Yeah.
So being able to, and then what they found as well is this whole notion, especially after water loss, we're like, take it to the cleaners and get it dry cleaned. Well, dry
Yes.
cleaning isn't really the proper process, depending on, again, I'm going down this like hole as far as fabrics and this, that, and the third. But sometimes actually restoring the contents is less expensive for the insurance company than totaling it out and paying it.
Hmm.
And then final note, I remember again years ago when I worked at State Farm, our intranet at the time was salvage. And so I worked from a location that actually had basically like a storeroom where they kept salvage. And so you could scroll through there and you would be able to see, it was almost eBay style where you can bid on the salvage. And you're like, oh, look, that's a handbag. It happened to be in the house where something happened,
Yeah.
but there's no visible issues with that particular bag, right? So obviously it was degraded enough where it was totaled out, but
Yeah.
it still, had value. If you were okay with, a TV that had a scratch that they got, they recovered at the police department that the owner just didn't want. Um, so it was better than like a yard sale because you know the history of it.
Yeah.
You know where it came
Yeah.
from. You're like, would I buy that? Probably not because I don't want the money I'd have to put into it to fix it. Versus, yeah, but the salvage ability. But more
Yeah.
importantly, like I said, that preservation of stuff so that it could be determined so you can land at the same conclusion. I
Yeah.
recently, of course, had the water loss here in my home and, had that debate, as far as what do you keep, what do you toss, what do you replace, what is it valued at? And there's certain things that, depending on the severity of it, obviously my handbag, nobody was going to make me hold it until they could like come send a person out to lay eyes on it.
Hmm.
But if you're talking about, again, a piece of commercial equipment, if you're just tossing stuff and the insurance company reserves the right to inspect, to repair or replace, it's not your preference.
Yep.
Right. If you want it replaced, but they're going to pay for the repair, you don't get to choose. You know what I mean? So there's so
Hmm.
many things that cooperating and staying in communication throughout the process. How many times has the agent's office gotten a call? I can't get a hold of Matt at the number you gave us.
Mm.
He stopped responding. We're on the clock because, most states have a prompt payment of claims statute that says that they have to settle once they're given everything they've asked for within a certain length of time. And so reminding the insured that one of the conditions under the policy is that you are cooperative, responsive, and you assist with the settling of your own claim.
Yeah. Yeah. And back to Mike's earlier point, uh, as the broker, do not be the gatekeeper of what stays and what goes. Do
Hmm.
not, I mean, like, do not think that all of a sudden you are an expert in, what can be salvaged or what can be fixed and what needs to be thrown out or can be thrown out. So, those are all really good points. Let me ask you this question. This is like for claims adjusters. This is like a four-letter word. Um,
Oh boy.
Public adjusters.
Oh.
Okay. So where like do you even bring that to the table as an option? Do you even talk about it? Do you just let the insured come to that conclusion? I mean, how does that conversation like do you even volunteer that information that there are public adjusters available or do you let the insured kind of like get there and then once they get there you kind of like, say, okay, well, this is the pro, this is the con, and then I'm going to leave it up to you. Like how do you foresee your role as the broker in terms of whether or not a public adjuster gets into the mix with your insured?
Public adjusters, attorneys, there's such a huge marketing campaign. And of course, full disclosure, I'm a little bit biased because I focus on transportation. You're hard pressed to watch like a middle of the day television show without somebody screaming at the camera about
Yeah.
how they're going to get your settlement and, blah, blah, blah. And the first thing that always comes to mind is, did you even give the insurance an opportunity
Yeah.
to take care of you? Right.
Yes.
Because a lot of that is fee based. And so just by default, the whole, oh, we don't, you don't pay anything unless we win a settlement. Well, where do you think that payment ultimately comes from?
Yeah.
So I had a scenario again early in career where we had older lady was driving. She was our insured. Granddaughter was in a passenger seat. It was a four-way stop. There was a dump truck involved, and there was a collision, right? And so they jumped the gun. They ran out and they got, third-party counsel, hired a lawyer or whatnot. Come to find out, grandma did not have the right of way. Okay. So they jumped into it because they were anticipating that they were going to be suing this dump truck and everyone wanted to get paid. Right.
Yep.
Well, since both of them had retained a lawyer, of course, granddaughter was advised that she could still consider move forward with her suit, but now she's suing grandma.
Oh,
right.
brutal.
But that point, again, they've got so much in the average insured. Do they really understand like how all that works? Like this jackpot that you're trying to secure comes out of the same bucket of money, So
Thanksgiving dinner was never the same.
Well, the year we sued grandma, that was fun.
And that's also interesting because like treehouse claims are like that too, right? Like so back when tree houses were more prevalent, like you'd have cousins over and nieces and nephews and stuff like that, and you'd have you'd have the aunt or the uncle or the brother or the sister that retained counsel, right at the onset, and now you're involved in active litigation with a family member. I mean, that usually doesn't end well. I can't see how that is like cordial throughout, but
now, if someone started the process and if there's a crossroads, right, and basically what they're looking for is a disinterested party to come in and kind of arbitrate, referee, or whatever, just to make sure that everyone does what they're supposed to do. Again, we're not going to hide the fact that they do, have the right to go, now, I don't know if I would call public adjuster disinterested necessarily. But, obviously that's their role. I think Mike has a comment about public adjusters.
So I can't tell. So he says, I love him. And I don't know if he's being sarcastic because he follows that up with the head smack emoji. So I don't know if he's head smacking as in I shouldn't say that it's kind of like a 4-letter word, or if he's being sarcastic with the love him comment. Maybe he can clarify.
I think that, again, a lot of that is, I hate to say it that way, is kind of a state by state position.
That's a good point.
Because there are a lot of states, just like anything else with insurance, as far as a standardization in terms of who has to be licensed, who has to be, who has to know what they're doing to get a piece of the action. So yeah, it's one of those things that, by the time if you've tried it the traditional route, right? You file a claim and if, as long as everyone's responsive and everything seems to be going well, I think that it's premature to jump out and assume that you need someone to come in and, kind of argue your way through, especially if it's a claim where you're working with your own insurance company. Third party stuff gets a little hairy. So that's kind of my take on it. How do you feel about them?
Public adjusters, I will, in most cases, I will just let the insured come up with the idea of it themselves. More often than not, especially if they're a business owner, they talk to other business owners, and public adjusters market like anyone else, and so like in certain industries, folks talk, and so sometimes they just kind of come up with the idea. I will try and talk them off the ledge, a la what you were talking about, and be like, look, give the insurance company a good faith shot, right? Like let them operate in good faith, and then if you feel like it's going south, then bring in the public adjuster, or see if you can just kind of keep the public adjuster like updated, but not officially involved. And then if it does start to head south, then, you could do whatever you feel like you need to be better represented. There were a couple of claims where that happened and it was actually necessary. The problem was at the end of the day, like it wasn't a good relationship, and the insured and the insurer ended up parting ways at the end of it. But it was kind of necessary because there was a lot of things that were in dispute, right? And so if it's not a very cut and dry claim, a cut and dry claim like a public adjuster isn't really going to add too much value.
Right.
You know, at the end of the day, it'll probably even be a wash, or you might even, as the insured, end up behind because they get their vig, right? But there have been a couple of claims where I didn't advocate for, but when the insured came to me and said, look, we want to involve a public adjuster right from the get-go, I didn't talk them off of that ledge because of just how one of the claims was a huge Superstorm Sandy claim, and it was in the tens of millions of dollars. And I was like, you know what? Like, yeah, because bring in the public adjuster, because from this standpoint, myself, even our claims department, even the individual insureds with the size of their organization, no one was going to be able to keep tabs on the way that this claim was being handled by the insurance company to figure out whether or not it was being done in good faith, right? But that's a special situation. Like if you deal in those jumbo accounts, a lot of times those jumbo accounts have public adjusters on speed dial, and the public adjusters work in that world, and so they probably know a lot of the insurance carriers that work in that world too. So there's already this kind of ecosystem that's set up, you know.
And to be fair, there's certain claims that have a little bit more give and certain ones that don't.
Yeah.
Like property's pretty finite. You know what I mean? Bringing somebody in, unless you're arguing the merits of whether or not it's covered or not, right?
Or huge BI claims, because you can get into a dispute of, what the actual BI impact is. Yeah.
And so, it has its place, right? I mean, there's a market for it. But to your original question, do I tee it up? Do I say, hey, if you don't like what they're saying, Google that? Like, no.
No.
But I also don't, speak ill against it. I mean, they exist for a reason. But I think that it's really important that they understand the process, that they know, their rights in terms of, something is denied, or, they get a reservation letter and they don't know what to do with that, or, they can kind of understand and expect process. And so that again goes back to the ability of our claims personnel to articulate well. Right. And to understand that what we get into a lot, and I don't remember who had mentioned it. I think it might have been, again, Tony Kanye's plug, video where he was talking about, education creep. We get into these circles where we're just, nerding out with one another, and we assume that this level of jargon, of, verbiage is just layman's terms and easily understood. And so if we don't check for understanding, when we're dealing with people who this is not their world, then sometimes that's the trigger that makes them go and get someone else, because they feel like you're trying to talk over their head, and now they've got to beef up and bring someone in who speaks your language. And if it becomes a you versus us type of thing, that's normally when people feel the need to again, retain outside representation. But that's another thing too that the insurers need to understand. Once you've brought in a lawyer or a public adjuster, whoever, game over. We're not in communication anymore.
Yeah.
You're paying them to talk for you. And so people get frustrated a lot of times too when they're out of the loop, because it's like, no, don't tell it to me, tell it to him, he'll tell it to me. That's how this works now.
Yeah, that also brings up the point of like how you're perceived as the broker. If you're an independent agent, and again, there's all kinds of different, broker or agent relationships, right? If you're perceived as an independent agent who's technically supposed to be erring on the side of the broker, on the side of the insured, you're going to make that individual run to a public adjuster or an attorney if they feel that you are more biased towards the insurance company. Now, that being said, you're walking a tightrope because you also want to maintain a good relationship with those insurance companies to be able to place future business with them. So that puts you in, a situation where, again, you can't be overly, one way or the other, but you should kind of like err, like, the tie goes to the insured, basically, right? It's a little bit different if you're a risk management consultant, all right? So depending on what hat you're wearing, if you are a broker or an insurance agent, you're wearing this kind of precarious type hat where you're going back and forth. If you're a risk management consultant, you probably have very little allegiance to the insurance company,
Hmm.
right? Like you're directly contracted with the insured, and it is assumed that you are going to do everything in your power to make sure that they are taken care of in the best way possible. And so
Yes.
I've seen risk management consultants that, juxtaposed to what we're talking about for an insurance broker. This RMC just like is like, all right, we've had a claim, bring in my guy, and I've got my guy who's a public adjuster who's going to take care of this. Or sometimes they even, maybe have someone in house that kind of works on things from that standpoint. So that's also a big distinction is, in what capacity are you working? If you are a captive agent, right? Um, sorry, like your job is pretty much like I report the claim and then I go like this, right?
Hmm.
Like for the most part, you can provide information to the insured and stuff like that. But, from that standpoint, you have to be at the very least Switzerland, if not tie goes to the insurance company because, that's just the nature of that relationship,
And
Um,
as far as involvement goes, sometimes moving it along, right?
mm,
Because you'll talk to an insured and maybe just in conversation, pass, hey, by the way, how things going? Oh, I haven't heard from, and oh, I'm so frustrated because all these things are happening. And offering to follow up on their behalf, there's no harm in that.
yeah.
There's a lot of carriers that, we may represent where you can even go into a portal and you can kind of see the disposition of it, the status, some of the notes. You're like, oh, it looks like they were actually waiting for you to send over a police report. Oh, thanks. I thought that I was waiting on them, to make the next move. And
Yep.
so having certain checkpoints, whether they're suspenses, calendars, whatever, so that you can resolve, hey, did this get to an expected outcome? Right.
Mhm.
And is there anything that I can do to kind of massage it along and just say, hey, oh, I've been calling, I can't get a hold of anyone. Oh, this is the number that I have. Is that the number you've been reaching out to? Because maybe they're still dialing like that, first notice of loss number, not
Mm.
realizing that they need to be communicating directly with someone else. So I've done that,
Yep.
and forwarded them things and kind of let them know, hey, this is the status as I see it. Did you get that replaced? Especially our responsibilities post loss as a broker, making sure did those repairs get done because
Mhm.
it's almost renewal time.
Yeah.
And so our
It's true.
inspections are going to be predicated on, did you replace it? Did you rebuild it? Did you do what you're supposed to do? Because there's going to be some concerns, if not. And that's another thing I think that, insureds are sometimes surprised. If you take the money, the expectation is that you did what you were supposed to do with it,
Yeah.
especially if we're going to continue to insure it. So we have to make sure from our, do we need to remove a location? Do we need to update, replacement costs? What are the things that we need to do that impact, the transactional stuff that, again, so there's a time and place to follow up. To your point earlier, it might be in poor taste to make it too much of a sales approach. Well, if you'd have showed up to some of those reviews I invited you to, you might have known how
Yeah.
that was going to go.
Nothing
Right
like
at the
kicking your
time.
client when they're down. Like, yeah.
But then, and when the time is right, when you revisit that, and again, that goes back to, as we talked about, how I prefer to do my reviews is here's your coverage as is. Let's
Mm,
apply a fictitious, loss scenario to it. Let's look at what the outcome is as is, and then let's look at what the outcome might be once we, make some of these changes that I've recommended.
yep.
But only in this case, you don't have to create a fake scenario. You can look at it and you can say, okay, so now that this is done, let's talk about that scheduled policy. Let's talk about those increased limits. Let's talk about those things because that's also, and now it's real, right? Because
Mhm.
up until now, like you said, we're just speculating about all the things that could possibly happen. But, once they've actually experienced something like, wow, I didn't think that we were vulnerable. I didn't think we had this exposure. And you say, yeah, if you don't like how it came out this time, what can we do so that if you have a future loss,
Mhm.
you're in a better position.
Oh yeah, and I mean, look, that's also an opportunity. That's also a sales opportunity, right? With prospects, in terms of one of the first things I ask them about is after I'm asking them if they had any kind of claims history is like, what's your experience been, right?
Hmm.
Were you happy with the coverage? Were you happy with how the process played out? All of that goes to the heart of figuring out whether or not they're happy with the insurance company they're currently with, whether they're happy with the current coverage plan and everything like that. And this conversation also makes me think of, and we'll have to reach out to him John Bachman talks a lot about, and I forget if John, I'm not sure if John ever got a CPCU, but I mean, we'll bring in any professionals we need to regardless. But I think John really talks a lot to this kind of like communication relationship management that happens on the part of the claims adjuster during that process. And, like you said, a lot of those consistent issues that come up from the insured has to do with communication, whether it be frequency, the means, and, where and what time they try to communicate with the insured. And so a lot of that can just be these little idiosyncratic things that contribute to a bad claims outcome when truthfully everyone's operating in good faith and it's just the wires didn't connect, so to speak, in order to get there. So
And a
yeah.
stellar claims experience will create a customer for life.
Mm-hmm.
I've had times when I've gone up against someone else and my premium was better, but they're like, man, when XYZ happened and they were so caring and they held the umbrella or whatever. And I will ride it out with them as long as I'm able because they came through for me in my vulnerable moment. So
Yep.
for the claims folks that are listening, again, this isn't a critique of how you guys do your job. This is a reminder that we need you in order to do what we do. Because when we're able to boast and brag that, again, our people are great at what they do and they have that experience on the back end. And on the other end of it, I've heard folks that said, again, that person was just, they were cold. They they overtalked me. I've shared, in some circles, some of the really great moments and some of the less than stellar moments I had with my personal loss earlier this year. Where I really had to kind of step into the driver's seat a little bit and advocate for myself because I'm able to. Right.
Yep.
And so, again, those interactions, and they don't even have, the irony is it doesn't really correlate to the size of the payout. A lot of times when they have a really good experience, it's not because, man, they hooked me up, they paid me.
Yeah.
That's really not the thing. It usually has to do with either speed or, again, just those soft skills. They listened, I cried, and they didn't, shame me for it, whatever,
Yep.
just being humans, right?
Yeah. No, and that's a really good point. I mean, it's not, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of payout that makes the difference. Usually the final resolution of the claim doesn't, I mean, in terms of the insured's perception of how it went, isn't directly correlated with the amount of money they got. In fact, you could have claims where, you have 97% coverage on the claim and the insured can be dissatisfied with the claims process. So, it's just not a matter of cutting a check, though, maybe the speed at which the check is cut is more important than the actual amount sometimes, or a lot of times, which was one of the pieces of feedback that we got a lot from. I've never done a ton of personal lines, but working as a broker in New Jersey during Sandy and throughout Sandy and after Sandy, a lot of the conversation was about the claims adjusting process and how certain carriers handled it. And I can remember specifically, and again, we're agnostic. I mean, we don't get, marketing dollars or anything like that from anyone, but I can tell you that one of the insurance carriers that I got really good feedback about was Chubb because, especially for the personal homeowners that were, that we had that were in that like high net worth tier, dude, Chubb just showed up and started cutting checks. Like it wasn't a matter of, how are we going to nickel and dime these people? It was just like, let's get them the money that they need and try and get them back whole as quickly as possible. And that was remembered. And,
Yes.
A lot of those clients, like you said, those insureds, one, the broker looked like an all-star because there was money in the client's hands really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
And, you ask them, like, do you want me to market your coverage? So they're like, sure, I'll look at other quotes, but quite frankly, I mean, nothing's probably going to get me away from Chubb unless it's like, half of what I'm paying now. In which case you're like, yeah, well, all right, I'll get you some quotes, but we're probably staying with Chubb.
Exactly.
But so, look, we have, this is a conversation that we could keep having, and even go deeper on and talk about some more specifics and stuff. But I think this is a great primer for anyone who is a broker, an agent, and they're kind of like asking for, direction in terms of where their place is in this claims process. So I think we touched on a lot of the big pieces. Before we get out of here, any final take homes?
Nope, just be safe. It's, 'tis the season, it's summertime.
Mm,
People are traveling, outside is open
yes.
again this year, and people are super excited about that. Being mindful about just all the things that entails in terms of personal safety, property safety, and whatnot. So typically there's a lull from new business, during the
Hmm.
summertime. A lot of us find that, we have our 7-1s that are probably ruling our day right now.
Hmm.
But outside of that, people are just away from their desks, right? So this is a really good time to get in front of people and just again touch base. It might not be a sales driven thing, but just from a rapport relationship building, you know, identify, how to best use your time right now
Yeah.
and just keep your eye on the ball.
Yeah. And you know what? This is a great touch point time because people aren't expecting it.
Hmm.
So do it in maybe like a low complexity way. I mean, hell, if your family takes a vacation, take a picture of yourself having a good time and, email it to your clients. As long as it's like in good taste and everything, obviously, don't be like drunk and like hanging over a railing or something. But no, if you're having a good time with your family or you're in a beautiful place, like, take a photo op and send it to your clients and be like, look, I know I normally send you a card during Christmas, right? But that's when it's expected, right?
Hmm.
Christmas in July, send them something they don't expect, and continue to build that bond with them. Uh, Look, the best thing is like when someone's on vacation and they still take your call, and you're like, look, you crazy person, you're on the beach, and they're like, look, you're my favorite insurance broker. I will pick up the phone no matter what. So you have a good relationship with your insured when they're
Oh
willing to
yeah.
interrupt their vacation just to chat with you. So, look, that is it. This is Sell Like a CPCU. We are here every single Wednesday at 3 p.m., 2 p.m. Central, bringing you tips, tricks, and sales techniques, best practices, all the good stuff. Make sure to hit it. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, please hop over to YouTube and subscribe. Help us with that. We've been growing the YouTube subscriptions and trying to network within the society, but especially if you're outside of the society, please throw us a sub there and turn on notifications so that you know when we go live in the future. But yeah, with that, another one in the books. Shoot, I forgot to put the number on the title again. I'll get it eventually. We'll figure it out one of these days. But
Yes.
and I will see everyone in like an hour and a half for How to CPCU, where we'll be talking with a new designee. So we got some new blood coming into the society too,
You
which
got the
is
name right
fantastic.
now, so yeah.
Yes, yeah. that was good times. Believe me.
Awesome.
Little mini heart attack. So, with that, we will see everyone next week. Have a very good afternoon and evening.
See you guys.